Welcome to our final 3 videos in the series of videos on Darwin's The Origin of Species. These final 3 videos focus on the reception and extension of Darwin's theory from the origin of species over the course of his lifetime and into the beginning of the 20th century. In this video, we're going to focus on Darwin's own extensions of his theory and the work in which he was engaged throughout the remainder of his life. Darwin lives until 1882 and continues to be productive almost to the end of his life. Among the highlights, his major work on the effects of interbreeding and crossbreeding, and especially as applied to plants. He wins the Copley Medal, the Nobel Prize before the Nobel Prize in 1864, and the Copley Medal continues to be awarded. And he continues to extend his understanding of evolution to the behavior of plants and animals, but he's mostly focused on botany through the rest of his life. Again, the variation of animals and plants under domestication. So that's one of his projects. The other project is the extension of the theory of evolution to human beings, resulting first in the Descent of Man in 1871, and his work on the evolutionary basis of emotional behavior in 1872. Then in 1872, he also completes the other piece of his life's work, the final 6th edition of The Origin of Species. That's the edition on which our text is based. And as you can see clearly, in the 15 years since the publication of the original book, Darwin had continued to expand, modify, and adjust both the text and the argument in the light of objections and new evidence. That's his last major publication, but he continues to do major work in botany with his son Francis. Francis was also the co-author of the book on the movements and habits of climbing plants, the only person to receive a co-author credit with his father, and finally passes away in 1882. The major piece of Darwin's later career that I would like to focus our attention on today is one aspect of his ongoing revision of The Origin of Species. And that's the role of use and disuse in creating variation. So this is a position that is most associated today with Jean-Baptiste Lamarck. So Lamarck believed that organisms evolve by passing down changes caused by the environment to their offspring. So, for example, a Lamarckian, although probably not Lamarck himself, might explain the length of a giraffe's neck by the fact that its ancestors' necks had been stretched out in order to eat leaves from the tops of trees. Whereas a pure, in modern language, Darwinian would say that it goes the other way. It just so happens that this giraffe's ancestors had extra long necks compared to other antelopes, and that then gave them an evolutionary advantage because they didn't have to compete for food with other antelopes, and therefore they had a large number of offspring. in the first edition, Darwin is pretty committed to the idea that variation is random, that it is not produced by the environment. However, as you've seen, by the time we get to the sixth edition, he has introduced variation due to use and disuse and its inheritability into his theory. And he's done that for two reasons. Basically, what he needs, he thinks, is to speed up the rate of evolution. He thinks that on his account of purely random variation, evolution is too slow to be accounted for by the historical and fossil record. And he gets that from two places. He has two good reasons for thinking that. One, he has a theory of blended inheritance. So Darwin did not know about Mendelian genetics or about modern genetics at all. He proposed various theories of inheritance, but crucially, as was common in the 19th century, he believed that inheritance was blended. That is, that the offspring had traits intermediate to those of the parents. So, if your mother is tall and your father is short, you're likely to be in between them in height. And he believed that this blended inheritance was the default form of inheritance. And now notice, if that's true, it's going to tend to wash out, water down new variations that are introduced into a population. They won't be passed on intact. They'll be watered down. That then leads to the second reason, which is William Thomson, that is Lord Kelvin, the most important physicist of the 19th century, the man for whom we name the Kelvin scale, estimates that the world cannot be more than about 40 million years old. Kelvin gets this by calculating how long it would take the world to cool to its current state if it had started as a ball of molten minerals and metals. So basically, take it at a particular temperature, figure out how much energy it's getting from the sun and how long it would take to cool, and you come to about 40 million years. And there's actually nothing wrong with Kelvin's calculation. The problem was there are other sources of heat in the earth that Kelvin did not know about. In particular, Kelvin did not know that about radioactivity. The radioactive elements contained in the Earth's crust actually play a huge role in keeping the surface of the Earth warm enough to be inhabitable. So notice, right, these are both perfectly reasonable scientific hypotheses that Darwin is working from, and that lead him to introduce variation due to use and disuse into his theory. But he's really here almost being too good of a scientist. He's relying on the best available science of his day and then adjusting his theory in the light of that science, when in fact he'd have been much better off just holding firm to the logic of his own theory. Right? We now know that germline isolation, the fact that the genes that determine what is passed on to our offspring are isolated, are separate from the cells of the body. So what you do to the body has no effect on the genetic inheritance of your offspring. Now, yes, we are now discovering various potential forms of epigenetics and other forms of inherited variation. But the basic point that the unit of inheritance remains the chromosome is still sound. And so Darwin should have simply held firm to that claim. To that end, then, what we end up with in Darwin is a record of scientific inquiry. So just to end with a final comment about the text in front of you, this text forms a kind of a snapshot which records the debates over evolution, inheritance, and biology in the middle quarter of the 1800s.